from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. We had a big show for you this evening. Justin Simmons signs an extension with the team. The Broncos bring in another cornerback. Also, Benjamin Allbright has some insight onto what the top of the draft might look like. But we're going to start, Ben, with the big news that happened basically right around Friday morning, we found out that Justin Simmons is going to be with the team long term, something that you had actually had information. You broke the story that Justin Simmons was going to sign a 4-year, $61 million contract with $35 million guaranteed, the highest paid safety in the NFL. Why was this important to get done the way they did? And what does it say about this new regime with George Paton as GM that it was a foregone conclusion, more or less?
Well, you and I knew that Thursday night. We tried to hint to the listeners a little bit what was going on with that. And, obviously we weren't green lit to go ahead and put that out there yet. But the Broncos felt it was important. It's priority one. Get him and Shelby done. Reestablish the culture in this locker room and say that we take care of our own. And I think that has really resonated. The fact they got Shelby done on the long-term deal, they got Justin done on the long-term deal. You've got, the future face of the franchise, essentially. Von Miller is kind of passing that baton a little bit. It hasn't all the way been passed, but Von Miller's sort of passing that baton a little bit. And, I think that if you're the Denver Broncos over the last couple of years, there's been a culture in that locker room that players have felt like, hey, I'm playing for my big money contract, but that's probably going to be elsewhere. The Broncos just don't pay guys. So George Paton has come in and reset that, reestablished that. There's an energy. I've talked to players since then, and it really is something that's kind of palpable. It really is something where players are saying, Denver, if I play right and do the right things, Denver's going to value me and keep me, and they're going to keep me at a price level that's not insulting or asking me to take a hometown discount like guys like Derek Wolfe or Chris Harris have in the past. So, I think George Paton came out, did what he said he did, and established a credibility with this signing.
Right. There's some symbolism in making somebody the highest paid at their position. You say you think he's the best safety in the league, well, prove it. You got to back it up with the money. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of people out there that probably thought, he didn't have to be over $15 million. They could have gotten it done right at $15 million. But you're sending a bit of a message there. You're sending something to the locker room. You're sending something to the fan base. I love the point you made there, and Justin kind of echoed that in his press conference, just about the next guys that are coming up. Bradley Chubb, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, guys that you consider pillar players for your team, first and second round players. Mm-hmm. This sends a message to those guys too. I don't think anybody was expecting the Broncos to move on from Bradley Chubb necessarily. Mm-hmm. But, hey, after drafting Jerry Jeudy, there's an argument there that if KJ Hamler has a nice year and Jerry Jeudy has a nice year, maybe the Broncos decide not to pick up Cortland Sutton. But at this point, I feel as though there is a culture shift there in the front office, and I think that's what this kind of hammers home, specifically the decisions with Shelby Harris and with Justin Simmons.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the players feel that. I think they do because, like I said, having had conversations with some of these guys over the weekend and talking to them about this stuff, there is a renewed sense of optimism that if they do the right things, they play well on the field, that they can remain Denver Broncos and not have to hit free agency and hit the market and see what's out there.
And that's not to say that John Elway didn't have ever intention of ever keeping any of his guys. But you have pointed out, and I think this is a very important note on this, is he approached it a little bit more like the Patriots did, where they tried to get moving on from guys maybe a year early from when they're peaking, right? And so that mentality means you're probably not retaining guys. We're going to be big players in free agency. We've seen the Patriots be that team. They don't really value their draft picks as much. But I mean, the fact is they've hit on free agent acquisitions. They've had Tom Brady there for a really long time. They've had a level of success that they've been able to lean on that. For John Elway, doing the same kind of thing, same philosophy, that isn't saying that his philosophy was wrong. It just didn't work out the same way, in part because he didn't really have Tom Brady.
Well, that's the thing. You saw it work out for John when he had Peyton Manning.
Exactly.
And you saw it work out for Bill Belichick when he had Tom Brady. But now you look at that and you look at John Elway over the last couple of years, and it's much more difficult. Had to do different things. And then you look at Bill Belichick now, and it's weird to me how people are saying that Belichick's doing something different this year. He's not. He's doing the same thing. He's just having to pay fair market value because he doesn't have a quarterback people are willing to take a discount to come play with. So, that's really the thing. The problem with doing the free agent route is as long as you've got the quarterback secured, you're going to be good. But the minute that goes away, all of a sudden you're going to be in a world of trouble.
Vic Fangio called Justin Simmons the quarterback of the defense, and you talked about passing the torch, not quite yet for the face of the franchise. But that's the thing, is we talk about pillar guys, bricks, right? That's what we always talk about. And Justin Simmons was a brick. We knew he was going to be back with the team either way, and he talked about how it didn't disappoint him to get the second franchise tag because he had talked to George Payton. He knew the intention was that it was just a placeholder, something that we've been saying on the show for a very long time. This was procedural. That's all. Nothing more. They wanted to make sure that they weren't competing against anybody else in negotiating this contract. They sent a message to the locker room. They sent a message to the fan base. And then on top of that, you put yourself in position where you have one of the leaders, the quarterbacks of the defense, back with your team for several years to come. I also like, by the way, what Vic Fangio said, how he still thinks there's some more to Justin Simmons. And you know what? I remember when Vic got here and said that about Von Miller, and people kind of got really weird about it. Like, what are you talking about? Von Miller's one of the best pass rushers to ever put on a Broncos uniform. How can you sit there and say there's more to Von Miller? Justin Simmons, I thought he took that the right way in his press conference, and he said he's 100% right, and I can't wait to improve and show Vic and this organization that I do have more to me.
And that's part of what they reiterated that presser was the 20 more plays quote. Yeah. That's something that they've had a defensive meeting about, and they said, look, if we make 20, not individually, but as a unit, make 20 more plays over the course of a season, right? Then that changes the outcome of that season, whether that's forcing a fumble, getting a stop, getting an interception, whatever that is. And so that you always want to set goals that allow you and your friends and your teammates and your comrades and whatever to improve. You never want to feel like you've reached the pinnacle because then you sit back and relax. And so I think that's what Vic's motivational tactic was with Von. I think that was what it is with Justin as well.
Yeah, it certainly seems like that. They put themselves in position with the defensive front, with the secondary. And we'll remain to see what they do at the inside linebacker position. Free agency, of course, isn't done yet. So a lot of people that have judged the Broncos up to this point, yeah, certainly. You want to take a look at what they've done. You want to project what they can do. There are still some options, and they're in really good salary cap space. When we come back, one of the key signings so far in NFL free agency is a reunion of sorts. We'll get to it next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. The Broncos continue to add to the secondary. We talked about Justin Simmons. We have mentioned Ronald Darby. They signed him on the first day of NFL free agency, and sometimes patience really does pay off as the Broncos add Kyle Fuller on a one-year, $9.5 million contract. The Chicago Bears needed to get under the cap. Now, they somehow were able to get there just on the other side of the deadline, but they weren't going to be able to hang on to Kyle Fuller at $20 million guaranteed, or a $20 million cap hit, I guess, is more than anything, and they save $11 million in the process. So they weren't going to be able to do that. Almost everybody knew that this was eventually going to happen. Talk to me about what the Chicago Bears were trying to do here.
Well, first of all, this is a story we told you in advance that the Broncos were going to be after two corners in free agency. It was just a question of whether or not that other corner was going to hit free agency. We were on this Thursday night as well. Now, the Bears dragged their feet on this a little bit. That caused our timeline to be a little off. Still got it in under the 48-hour mark like we told you. But
nice work.
With this situation, Kyle wanted to come play for Vic. He knew he was getting released, and they kind of soft reached out to see if, just plant the seed. Hey, if I get released, I'd be interested, and just kind of leave it at that. That way there's no tampering.
Because there were other suitors.
Right, well, and you don't want to tamper. So,
right.
They kind of left that out there. The Broncos, with the Justin Simmons news, which they had not expected necessarily that Justin was going to sign that deal and that quickly, were able to capitalize on the savings that Justin's new contract provided versus the franchise tag to be able to weaponize that money and go out and get Fuller. So it all kind of came together in about a 24-hour period there on Wednesday and Thursday. And then the Broncos were just sitting there waiting on the Bears to release him so they could put the offer in front of him and go from there. And there were other suitors. There were other people that kind of called, and the Bears kept dragging their feet because, well, for two reasons. One, they thought they were going to be able to trade him, and nobody was trading for that contract. And then two, internally, from what I'm told, the Bears were afraid that he was going to go across division to the Green Bay Packers. That was never even an option from either side. So it's interesting what teams will, be afraid of and make moves or not make moves because they're afraid of, and how wrong that intel can be internally at times. So that was of note personally. I will tell you the Chargers, Colts, and Falcons got involved or tried to get involved, but Fuller wanted to play here. That was always, he wanted to reunite with Vic. That was always the air quotes, the plan from his side. So really those talks didn't go anywhere. It was just call an inquiry, and then the Broncos got themselves a Pro Bowler, All-Pro corner to continue to stockpile for this secondary.
Pro Bowler in 2018 and 2019, and he led the NFL interceptions with 7, 21 passes defense to go along with 82 tackles in 2018. He was an All-Pro then, and just unbelievably productive player so far there for Chicago. So that's 2 corners now that have followed Vic Fangio over here to Denver. Bryce Callahan, Kyle Fuller. You had Ronald Darby. Michael Ojemudia is here. You still think that there's another level that he could go to. I mean, right now, absent what we know was going to happen at the other safety position, and Kareem Jackson's still a possibility, but absent the knowing what do you think about this secondary as it's built?
You're missing the strong safety, and that's not I wouldn't close the door on a return of Kareem Jackson. I wouldn't close. Right now, I would say that unlikely is probably, although that's a little strong, I would say that's the best. They're a little bit apart. The Broncos are comfortable at 1 year 5. Kareem kind of wants 1 year 8, and they haven't really, neither side has really budged on that, although the market favors the Broncos in this particular situation. I wouldn't close the door on that. I would not close the door on that. That said, as constructed, you need a strong safety. You do need somebody over there, whether it's going to be the draft or which it would be, but or Kareem. I think that you've got the makings of a very, very dangerous defense. Certainly the most talented defenses you've fielded since the Super Bowl run. Constructed a little differently. The philosophy is a little bit different, but very, very talented defense nonetheless. And I would be, if I'm opposing teams in this division, I'm looking around and saying, wow, this defense without 8 starters held Pat Mahomes last year on scheme alone. Now you add more talent to it. This could be a problem. And so this whole idea that you need some kind of arms race to get the best quarterback is not. You want to get the best quarterback you can, but this idea that you have to have the best quarterback in the division is not one that's actually accurate. And if you go back and look over the years, how many Super Bowls did Aaron Rodgers win despite being best quarterback in his division? Drew Brees, same thing. So I think what Broncos fans need to do is pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, we need to improve at the quarterback position, whether that's Drew improving or another quarterback or whatever. But at the same time, we don't need to measure ourselves by what other teams have at the position. We need to look at the entirety of our team and say, hey, look, we're about to field a competitive football team that can win some games, and this defense looks scary.
I think you put that perfectly, and I'll just kind of add to it a little bit. The 100% on you hired a defensive-minded coach for his scheme, for the way he sees things, with the anticipation of building a good overall team. I'd love to see what Vic Fangio could do with consistency at the quarterback. I can only imagine. I mean, think about it. He's like, 6, 7 different quarterbacks in his first 2 years here in Denver. Just imagine if he had one guy during that time that was the starter. You trusted that he was going to make good decisions. They didn't put the defense in bad positions constantly, which the Broncos did seem like they found themselves, and we actually have stats to back it up. They were oftentimes put in really bad situations. Like, they were 4th worst opportunities there on the defensive side based on performance of the offense. So that's kind of where I come back to this as, the way to race this thing isn't so much the trade everything you possibly have to go get a quarterback. It is to build the best team that you can possibly put out there on the field, and then try to, again, sort of work within the confines of knowing that we have to slow down the opposition while taking advantage of their mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's really where this thing comes into play. This defense, as constructed, is designed to give Vic the best chance to earn another contract. Honestly, this is designed, like all those people that were saying that Vic Fangio is about to be fired, man, George Payton has built this thing for Vic Fangio to succeed. I would say that Vic Fangio's seat is a lot less warm than it was a few months ago, simply by virtue of how George Payton is building his football team.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the NFL draft, what the Broncos have done in free agency, how that affects the first round. We'll get to that next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Talked about the defense. Justin Simmons, Kyle Fuller now in the fold. Our attention will turn here soon to the NFL draft. The Broncos have a decision to make at pick number 9. Do they stay put? Do they trade up potentially for a quarterback? Or do they trade back and acquire future draft capital potentially and maybe still get a talented player there. Maybe cornerback is no longer the focal point there in the first round. You still could look at cornerback. I think that you should, considering you have Bryce Callahan and you have Kyle Fuller on 1-year deals. Looks great right now, but you still need a plan for the future. We can get into that. But you put out a couple of days ago your best guess of the first 9. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but more or less falling in line with, hey, I think 4, maybe even 5 quarterbacks could go in the top 10, but you had 4 quarterbacks. But when you got to number 9, where the Broncos are sitting, you put mystery team. And then today, I just think by coincidence somehow, purely coincidence, Mel Kiper put out his mock draft, and the Broncos trade back with the Minnesota Vikings at 14. They end up getting Micah Parsons there. We'll see if that ends up being the pick or not. There's some off-field stuff there. But more than anything, the Broncos have built some flexibility based on their moves in free agency, and if they are not trading up from pick 9, it seems like there's going to be a lot more of these kind of falling in line with your thinking here.
Well, I'm not putting this stuff out there just to speculate. Like that's the thing. I think most people around the market know that at this point. I'm putting out what I'm hearing, and you may like it, you may not like it, but it's not, and I don't put my opinion on it. I think that's the other part of this. It's like people think, well, this is what Ben wants to happen. No, Ben hasn't put out what he wants to happen at all. I just tell you what I'm hearing, and we go from there. And if you look at the way this thing is playing out, it looks fairly obvious to me. And it looks like, and Peyton and others have hinted, Jeff Legwold tweeted about it this past week, that it looks like the Broncos are prepping to trade back. And I know there are people that have convinced themselves the Broncos are drafting Trey Lance because they went to his pro day. Well, I can tell you right now, George Payton's on his way to Mac Jones's pro day, and by the time this airs, he will have been at one of Mac Jones's pro days. Mac's going to throw out both,
right?
And I'm sure that they'll shift to that all of a sudden instead of the Trey Lance thing, because this is what they do is make things up and go knee jerk with it. But it looks to me like the Broncos are prepping for a trade back. I think they're exploring all options. I wouldn't, as far as trading up goes, I don't think that's something that they're looking to do. But if the right opportunity presented itself, you never say never. But I think that they're kind of surveying the landscape, and they've kind of seen how this thing is laying out. And they understand that the top 4 quarterbacks are going to be gone in the top 5 picks. And so they're preparing for those eventualities and setting in place things like, for instance, John Elway did. When John Elway set up a trade back with Buffalo a few years back, they had 3 players that they'd identified at the 5th overall pick that they would take, and they didn't expect any of those players to be there. So they put in place a trade to Buffalo to move back. Well, one of those players did end up getting there because the Browns selected Denzel Ward at 4. Bradley Chubb was sitting there at 5. And so John Elway called off that trade and then went with that. So that's what a good general manager does, is prepare for all those eventualities and understand, here's what could happen. Here's what's most likely. I need to prepare for all these so that I'm ready on draft day when the unexpected happens.
And so if you go into this knowing that the top 4 quarterbacks are likely gone in the top 5 picks, you also know what the price tag to trade up in those scenarios is as well. So if you do fall in love with one of these quarterbacks, and that's kind of what we've said from the beginning, sometimes we get accused of being just homers for Drew Lock. Drew Lock has plenty to prove here, and the Broncos have said over and over and over again, not just to us, but to just everybody that can listen, that they want to bring in competition. So there are still so many things on the table for the Broncos, but the fact is this is an information gathering time of year. And for George Payton, who's going to these pro days, that is part of the process. He wants to see these guys in person. If he sees something that says, that's my guy, that's the guy that's going to lead this franchise into the future, then he knows what the price tag is going to be to go get that player.
Yeah, and that's what you should do. That's your job as a general manager. It's not you're not the Tyrion Lannister. Your whole job isn't just to drink and know things, but you do got to know things. And so you got to know where, you got to know what it's going to cost to go up. You got to know what you can get if you want to go back. You have to know those things, and you have to have a full range of outcomes prepared. That's just good stewardship of the vessel that you're with. So George Payton knows that. He's been around the league a long time, and he understands that. He's watched Rick Spielman do it. He understands these concepts, and so that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to find out the price tags to move up, find out what I can get by moving back, and understand that a fluid situation, how to react in a fluid situation. As Bruce Lee put it, be water.
Love that. And meanwhile, as you mentioned, trading back, something that we've talked about, building the war chest, thinking about the future. George Payton says it's really important to value your draft picks, draft and develop. Well, if you can add future capital, whether it's 22 picks or 2022 picks, or if you're even just looking at day 2 picks for this draft, you're going to be adding talent, guys that could potentially start for you this year or into the future. Or if you decide you need to go get a quarterback next year because the plans didn't work out this way, you have an opportunity to pivot. And that's where being a good GM and knowing your options are out there. See, and that's the thing is like, I feel like sometimes I feel like we're screaming at the clouds here because we say this over and over again, yet people sort of box us in to this, well, you only care about these one thing. And I'm like, no, actually what I care about is a GM that's going to pay attention to all the options. I care about a GM that is planning for contingencies and has a plan beyond this 1 year. That's one of my criticisms oftentimes of the old regime is it seemed like, what can we do to win right now? I want to win right now this year. This is the year. And then sometimes that was a little bit short-sighted. Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, for example. And then you put yourself in quarterback purgatory or draft pick purgatory.
Right, where you're just good enough that you're not in position to be able to get a good young quarterback, but you're just bad enough that you're not really competitive. It's a pseudo-competitive, thing where you're close to the playoffs, but not really. And that's what teams like, for instance, the Bengals did for years. Fielded a great defense, but we're quite good at too good to be able to get that good quarterback, but not good enough to be able to do anything other than just make the playoffs. So.
But again, how often are you going to put yourself in position to have a top 10 pick? You have to pay attention to those opportunities if they present themselves, if a guy's going to be available for the right price.
And be flexible. Like I said, be water.
All right. Well said. Appreciate you watching Broncos Country Tonight. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.